You've got all of these different chemicals that are being absorbed on our plants, on our food, and we have a right to know what those are. So there's two problems. One is that a pesticide frequently has what's called the active ingredients and the inert ingredients. And the inert ingredients may be 99% of the chemicals, but they are not required to inform anybody about what those chemicals are. And many of them are highly toxic chemicals. They're just not the thing that actually killed the bug. They have some other use. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that we don't actually know enough as consumers about what are the chemicals that are on the food. We know organic versus not organic, but it's only right for people to have more information so they can make their own choices. And that information will change the way growers grow their crops because ideally the market will demand safer, less toxic food.
So what are you recommending people obviously eat as much organic as possible? I know that there's the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So this is put out by the Environmental Working Group. Are you in agreement with those, those guidelines?
Sure. I think that's a very good place to start. And at the same time, there's more information. What we really need is we need consumers to take some action, but we also need our government to do a better job of protecting us and of creating incentives for agriculture to want to actually use fewer as compared to more chemicals. And the last thing is these chemicals also have a bigger picture health impact, and that is their impact ecologically. Because if they have an impact ecologically that reduces biodiversity, that also has a long-term consequence for us.
Absolutely. Now, you said people should get involved. What are some ways that people could get involved with this issue, pesticides?
People can go to our website, and that's ceh.org, and they can get information about some of the campaigns that we currently have around this, such as demanding that the inert ingredients are disclosed. And right now the EPA is looking at requiring more disclosure of inert ingredients. And so it's a good time to weigh in with the federal government on that, because the new administration obviously has a more openness to these concerns than the previous one. So that's one thing. A second thing is people can influence the process by the food choices that they make. So that's something that they can do by buying food that has fewer toxic chemicals on it. And you can get more information about what those might be on the web, including our website.
Great. Let's shift a little bit and talk about household cleaners and laundry detergents. That's been in the news lately. I know that there was a study done about the cleaners in schools, and they found hundreds of toxic chemicals. I mean, I think Comet, was the number one worst offender, which is what I grew up with, had like over 100 different toxic chemicals in it. Can you talk a little bit about household cleaners and what we should watch out for?
Sure. We have a little first of all, we have a fact sheet on our website about how to make your own household cleaners. So if people are interested in that, there's some good information there on our site. But also, there are certain companies that are trying to make a play and create a market niche for themselves by making less toxic household cleaners. So people can actually look for the products from those companies. And I'm not necessarily endorsing those companies, but on average, they will have less toxins in their products, and that includes method and also seventh generation. Now, there's a third player in there, and that's Clorox, and Clorox has started to try to get into that space and compete with method and seventh generation, and so they have a line of products that are designed to compete with them, and so people can also know that line exists. Now, that's not all Clorox products. It's just one line that they have called
Right.
GreenWorks.
GreenWorks. Now, I've tried it. I like some of it. Some of it is very heavily scented, so I wasn't sure. I personally, I didn't care for the scent, and I told them that. But, I guess you can get the unscented, and it seemed pretty pure.
Well, and the scent, frequently the scent also has its own potential health impacts, not just the actual scent, but the chemicals that actually create that scent. Many of them are also potentially hazardous, especially to people who are more sensitive to them.
Right, because the word fragrance on a label can indicate there can be up to 100 different synthetic chemicals just to make up that fragrance. And I think people are not aware of it. It can cause asthma, trigger asthma attacks and upper respiratory problems. It could affect people's hormones as well.
This is also back to the issue of transparency. So the more information that companies are required to provide, the better. So that takes me to a very bigger picture issue, and that is that the federal law that regulates toxic chemicals is called TSCA, the Toxic Substances Control Act. And that law is a dinosaur. It was written in the 70s at the same time as the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, but it's never been updated. And it's extremely, extremely weak. In fact, it's so weak that the last chemical that the EPA tried to ban under that law is asbestos. They banned it maybe 20 years ago, and then the day after they banned it, they were sued by the asbestos manufacturers. The government lost, and the asbestos manufacturers were allowed to keep selling it. So this year, there's now a bill in the U.S. Senate to highly strengthen that law and to make that law actually have some teeth. And so the opportunity for people to weigh in on that will happen in the next 6 months.
And how would that? What would that look like? How would we weigh in on that?
Well, when people start to hear about it, or if they sign on to if they sign on for our newsletter, they'll be getting updates on it. There will be, what the law will say is something along the lines of chemicals should not be assumed to be safe until proven unsafe. Right now, you can just bring any chemical into the chain of commerce, and if you don't know anything about the health impacts, you're good to go. If this law were to pass and it were to be a well-written, strong law, then it would change things upside down. And it would say, you can't bring a chemical into the chain of commerce unless you have some basic health and safety data about it.
Yeah, that's what they're doing in Europe, right? This is called the precautionary principle.
Right, and you're exactly right. And in Europe, the bill that the EU implemented is called REACH, Research, Evaluation, and Authorization of Chemical Hazards. And what REACH says is basically what I just said. And so if we could do something like that here in the U.S., then it flip-flops the incentives, because instead of a company not wanting to know the chemicals that they use or sell, they actually want to know because they can't bring it to market unless they know. Mm-hmm. And then the companies that make stuff with these chemicals actually can have information, and they can know which ones are more or less toxic, and that allows them to try to make the more green stuff and then to sell their stuff as more green.
Now, I'd like to know, what is CEH doing to hold corporations accountable for their toxic chemical use?
Well, there's a few things we do. It's very much of a carrot and stick strategy. So the stick is that we are very active in enforcing toxic laws. So we frequently use toxic laws, including the California Toxics Act, to sue corporations that are illegally exposing people to toxic chemicals and force them to the table, at which point we demand that they stop exposing them, and they have to come to the table because we have sued them. We've gotten great results. That's how we got the lead out of all the different children's products, for example, and out of lots of air emissions from different facilities. For consumer products, when we use this law, it makes a big difference nationally and even internationally, because we are not really interested in signing an agreement that only requires the company to reformulate their products in California. We demand that they do it nationally. They usually don't like that, but they usually, more often than not, do it, especially because otherwise they have to have two lines, a line of California products and then a line of national products. So that's very much the stick approach. We also obviously use the media to force companies to change their practices. We also use a collaborative approach with companies that we feel like are really walking the talk. So, for example, if a large healthcare institution is buying lots and lots of computers, we'll work with them to help them know how to buy computers in a way that doesn't result in all kinds of toxic waste ending up in either on our landfills or being sent to China to be, quote, recycled, where in reality they're mostly just being dumped in villages and just, the 2 drops of gold and 1 drop of platinum is being extracted. So we can sometimes work with a large purchaser who buys 100,000 computers a year to make real demands of the Dells or the HPs of the world, and we find that to also be very effective.
That's really terrific. I visited Cambodia and saw the garbage dump there where the little children are digging around and, getting scrap metal. And it's a horrifying sight. So people need to be aware that we have this electronic waste that's being dumped there and poisoning people and our planet. And yes. So we just have another minute or so left. Can you give us your website one more time?
Sure. Our website is www.ceh, Center for Environmental Health.org.
That website again is ceh.org. Thank you so much, Michael. The work you're doing there at CEH is just incredibly important, and I'm so happy that you were able to join us today on Your Supernatural Life.